Okay, Science Journal just published a couple of nice articles on how plants are responding to the warming. And as have said before, the old saying is that nature makes the rules and biology finds the loopholes, which means biology often finds ways to survive when climate changes. And I have podcasts on the examples of corals that are actually thriving in warming waters because they have ways of coping with warming and even doing okay. And of course, some are getting hammered. So it's not like all ecosystems or all species will survive as climate changes, because the rate of change matters a lot, and so on, as we discussed before. Here is prop that says hot zone. In the world's hottest forests, scientists are probing how plants cope with rising temperatures. And this is infrared panels pushing plants on the forest floor in Puerto Rico beyond their comfort zone. So they are heating, creating hot temperatures to see how they respond. Obviously, they would have instrumented the small plot to see plant responses. Let's get some sense of what the article is about, and then we'll read a long review article about generally what is happening with vegetation responses under a warming world. Right? It was an experiment ahead of its time. Working in his laboratory in Breslau, Prussia, botanist Julian von Sachs placed a large glass bell jar over a flower pot and heated it from below with alcohol burners. The pioneering 19th century physiologist measured the rising temperature and watched how signs that the plant was in distress watched for signs that the plant was in distress, repeating the process with various species. It was the first effort to determine the hottest temperatures plants could survive. His finding 50 degrees C must have seemed unimaginably hot, but here we are knocking on the doors with heat waves reaching 50 degrees C and beyond regularly in some places. Sachs, now best known for his work on photosynthesis and plant nutrition, was simply curious. But today, as global temperatures climb and ecosystems are hit by heat waves, the question of how plants respond to extreme heat has taken on practical importance. Johann Woodling, a plant ecophysicist at the University of Gothenburg, says a global experiment is underway with potentially devastating consequences. So this is just an open experiment we are doing by increasing greenhouse gases and warming the climate. You could lose a lot of species that are on the edge, adds Lina Mercado, a plant ecophysiologist. Sorry, this is ecophysiologist, not ecophysicist. Ecophysiologist Woodling, and this is also ecophysiologist Mercado at the University of Exeter. Perhaps the biggest challenge confronting plants will be in the tropics, where temperatures are already high and are projected to rise as much as 4 degrees C by the end of the century if more isn't done to curb climate change. They are the hottest forests, says ecologist Kenneth Feely of the University of Miami. So the question is, what happens when we go into unprecedented heat? So here's another information graphic. In a lodge in Peru, researchers analyze leaf samples to measure how well plants photosynthesize. Okay, so you can see cute experiments. Always looks romantic when you see people out in the field doing some work with their cold drinks. Hopefully that's not beer. I'm sure it's not. Okay, Scientists already see signs that plants are responding to the roughly 1.5 degrees C of global warming so far. Well, we are just below that, but nonetheless, some tree species it's global mean, so locally there are much warmer places and cooler places as well. Some tree species in Mexico, for example, have shifted to higher elevations where temperatures are cooler, a recent paper in Science reported. So plants can move up if they can. There are mobile specialists and sedentary mobile sedentary specialists and mobile generalists, I guess that's the terminology. So when you have an ecosystem, the entire ecosystem doesn't move when climate changes. Some species jump out and move to a climate that suits them better, while the others just stay there and get cooked, right? So across America's tropical species aren't moving fast enough to keep pace with the warming, and researchers are skeptical that they will be able to do that. Evolution is not likely to be the is likely to be the answer only if things change and they can survive over time. But in this case, you know, just by migrating up the slope or immediately in response is not going to be the answer in the long run for survival if warming continues. Trees can take decades to start reproducing, making it unlikely that they can evolve new genetic adaptations for heat tolerance fast enough to withstand the rising temperatures. Basically, there are details whether genetic changes have to happen or already some genetic abilities there that they can adapt to a new climate by expressing that gene more frequently, as corals may be doing now already, and many vegetations. That means that over the coming decades, the fate of tropical forests may hinge in part on how well individual plants can acclimate to warmer temperatures by adjusting aspects of their structure or physiology. The question is especially urgent for the tallest species. The trees that make up the canopy right now during their lifetimes, they are going to see changes in temperatures that are quite significant, says Martin Slott, a plant ecologist at the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. To find out what plants are capable of, researchers are going far beyond Sachs' simple experiment from the 19th century. They are manipulating temperatures in plots of forest to push tropical species beyond their comfort zone. They are probing the traits of plants in a naturally superheated forest, and they are transplanting trees into warmer habitats to see how they are. So, increasing temperatures and looking for response may work for certain things like maybe stomatal conductance, whereas other evolutionary or adaptive traits have to be looked at by moving them to a warmer climate, and the monitoring has to be done on a longer time scale because there are slow evolving processes and fast evolving processes, right? The work has already revealed hints of resilience. We know that plants can handle a little bit of warming, says Slott, who has measured how temperature affects photosynthesis in dozens of species. They have the machinery to make adjustments that allows them to acclimate to gradual changes, but whether tropical forests can withstand the surge of warming likely in the coming decades remains a focus of feverish research. Okay, so as I said, rate of warming matters. Stakes extend well beyond the plants themselves. In the world's mega-diverse tropical forests, many species depend on the shade and microhabitats created by gargantuan trees that can grow 100 meters tall. The planet, too, depends on tropical forests. They hold as much as half of all the living carbon on land and continually suck in carbon dioxide emitted into the atmosphere by human activities. Obviously, now we are seeing that forests may be turning around and becoming a source of carbon because of all the perturbations, the warming, increased respiration in the soils and so on. Plants rely on photosynthesis for energy, and one worry is that as temperatures ramp up, their photosynthetic machinery won't be able to cope. This is what the experiment of Sachs was also trying to do, find out the maximum temperature at which they will survive. Survive means they can continue to photosynthesize, which is their basic mechanism of producing energy for themselves, and to lock it up that herbivores can use. So enzymes and membranes that are key to capturing photons and creating sugar are generally tuned to the range of temperatures a species experiences. So over time they have evolved this PI curve, light was photosynthesis versus light, and it has optimum beyond which it will start to drop, right, up to some certain increase in light and temperature, increase in temperature and light. photosynthesis may go up, but then it reaches a peak. If plants get much hotter or colder, photosynthesis becomes less efficient. In tropical species, photosynthesis starts to decline around 31 degrees C. By 47 degrees C, the photosynthetic machinery begins to be permanently damaged with the data we already have. Upper canopy leaves in tropical forests currently exceed 47 degrees C only 0.01% of that time, but that number could jump to 1.3% of the time with only a few degrees of warming, according to published literature. Another problem is that as temperatures increase, cellular concentrations of highly reactive oxygen-bearing molecules begin to build up, which can cause oxidative damage and disrupt cellular function. One reason for proliferation is that heat increases the speed of the chemical reaction that generate these troublesome molecules. So you evolved in one climate, everything is optimal, but when you warm, the same mechanism may become corrosive or detrimental to the plant itself. Plants do have ways to cope with heat stress, however. We'll look at a graphic in a minute. Increasing the production of isoprene, a volatile organic chemical found in many plants, for example, which can protect cells against reactive oxygen molecules. Plants can also tune their photosynthetic machinery to perform better at higher temperatures. One way is for leaf cells to make more saturated fatty acids to stabilize parts of the chloroplast, the plastid which is needed for photosynthesis or capturing sunlight to drive the photosynthesis. The organelle in photosynthetic cell chloroplast, where sugar is produced, can adjust, produce more saturated fatty acids that would otherwise become less efficient. So you can maintain efficiency by doing that. Here is another nice graphic. Steam rises from the geothermally heated boiling river in eastern Peru, where scientists are studying trees that manage to grow in the unusually hot environment. Of course, the thing is that they have evolved to grow in these temperatures, and you can see some phytoplankton, algae, and so on, and these trees are also living in this steamy hot weather, but that's happened over time, right? Oops, where did I go? Yeah, here. Plants can lower their own temperature as well. One strategy is to grow smaller, thinner leaves, which can dissipate heat more effectively than larger, thicker ones. Another involves opening tiny pores in their leaves called stomata, which allows water to evaporate. That can be an effective strategy in the plant if the plant isn't deprived of water, but during droughts, plants often keep their stomata closed to prevent water loss. It's a very optimal mechanism, stomatal conductance. It has to capture CO2 but not lose water. But if it gets hot, it can lose more water to cool down, but then it depends on where the photosynthesis is going to fail to produce the energy needed. Okay, so stomata that can evaporate, that can be an effective strategy. Only if there is no water stress, but during droughts, plants often keep their stomata closed to prevent water loss. When you combine the higher temperatures with droughts, then things get really stressful. Higher temperatures usually come with more water holding capacity and humidity, but only if it's not drought, right? During drought, actually soil water loss and water loss from leaves can go up because there is a vapor pressure deficit. A hot, dry atmosphere will take water vapor from the stomata if they open up. To find out whether any of these strategies might help tropical forests survive a hotter future, scientists have turned to a spot that offers a preview. The boiling river in eastern Peru that we looked at here, locally known as the Shanay Timpishka. Across a few square kilometers, a superheated groundwater rising from deep falls pushes temperatures as much as 11 degrees C above those of nearby areas. The air is so hot and humid near the river, which drains the scalding groundwater, that visitors are at risk of heat stroke. Okay, so be careful if you go there to Shanay Timpishka. Walking into the hottest part of the forest for the first time, ecophysiologist Alisa Kullberg, now a postdoc at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, was struck by how how oddly uniform it looked. Far fewer tree species grew there than in nearby cooler parts of the forest, she thought, an impression that was later confirmed by a study that was published. And the soil was strangely bare, lacking lush plants and wildlife. You don't see a lot of animals and you barely hear birds, she says. Sometimes dead frogs and snakes could be seen through the stream. So essentially, it's a weird forest, but very interesting because some species have evolved to live in that hot, humid air, but very few, which means if we keep increasing the temperature, what is the potential response? Will it look like that weird forest? Over the past several years, Feely Kuhlberg and colleagues have studied 6 tree species that are able to live near the river, and basically they find that compared with the individuals of the same species growing elsewhere, the trees in the hottest locations don't have smaller and thinner leaves or other physiological traits that might help them dissipate heat, such as a greater density of stomata, and they reported this already. But the team did find signs of heat tolerance after clipping fingernail-sized discs from leaves and probing their photosynthetic ability. At the tourist lodge where they were staying, Kuhlberg and the colleagues immersed each disc in water ranging from 28 degrees C to 68 degrees C. Then they probed each sample with a handheld fluorometer, which shines light on the leaf and detects the photons emitted in response by its chlorophyll. The team found that for 3 of the 6 species, photosynthesis in leaves from trees growing near the boiling river could tolerate higher temperatures. For example, in Cecropia membranacea, I don't know how it's pronounced, a small tree known locally as the yarumo, they found an increase in a measure known as T50, the point at which photosynthesis is impaired by 50% compared to the normal levels. Leaf samples taken from a cooler part of the forest could tolerate only 47 degrees C before reaching T50, but a leaf from the hottest area had a higher T50 of 51 degrees C. That's a good sign because it means the species has the ability to respond to future warming. Maybe it won't have a significant impact on their vulnerability. So they are continuing this, and she says, I think we are just really scratching the surface in terms of the understanding, which is important because we don't want to panic. Obviously, we see a lot of bad things, but it's much more interesting to understand the responses that help them survive so that you can understand the genetics of that particular species and see if there are ways to use those genes to help other plants of the same species, other regions with the same species, like they are doing with corals. Okay. The forest near the boiling river has had thousands of years to adjust to the geothermal heat, so rate of warming is always important. Researchers in several countries are seeking answers by planting trees adapted to cooler, high elevation conditions in lower elevation areas. So these are, active experiments where you put some species in a warming analog, and see how they respond. When trees were a few years old, the team measured their rate of photosynthesis in the field under a range of temperatures. The key data came from a portable gas analyzer, which, when compared to a living leaf, determines the amount of CO2 flowing into its tissue. So basically, these kind of experiments tell them that 2 higher elevation species showed no increase in their optimal temperature for photosynthesis after growing in the lower plots, which are 5 degrees C warmer on average, and this result is contrary to the hints of photosynthetic acclimation seen along boiling river. That's not good news. So fast adjustments may not be possible, but there are so many species that you don't know which species can adjust rapidly, because we have found that many birds, fish, and so on can have adaptations or genetic frequency changes in just one generation. So that's fairly rapid, but this is obviously not possible for all species. A latest study on 16 species showed that in slow-growing species, which typically make up the larger trees in older forests, photosynthesis was 30% lower. So obviously they can't adjust. It doesn't bode well for future old-growth tropical forests. Things that grow slowly typically get bigger, and they also respond slower. This is also true for fish and so on, or even humans in the tropics versus high latitudes. There are some differences, and these evolve over time, right? Elsewhere, scientists have shown have been actively applying heat to natural forests. In the Luquillo experimental forest in Puerto Rico, Tana Wood, an ecologist with the U.S. Forest Services and colleagues set up infrared panels we saw in the beginning to increase temperatures by up to 4 degrees C for a small plot, and the experiment began in 2016, and they have been monitoring the growth of seedlings to see whether the composition of species changes in the heated plots. They are also periodically collecting leaf samples to look for evidence that plants are adjusting to heat. So these are by nature short time experiments. Maybe they will run it for 50 years to see the time scales, because many ecological experiments, long-term ecological research kind of sites exist, and they monitor things for decades. Cal Coffee is one example of the west coast of California. So far they have seen mixed signals of acclimation. In one species the optimum temperature for photosynthesis increased somewhat, but in another it decreased. You can expect that. The researchers also extended the experiment to the canopy, which is too high to be warmed by the panels near the ground, but by adding small heaters to individual leaves near treetops, so you have to use a different strategy and warm individual leaves. They found a similar lack of photosynthetic acclimation. So another example, Christine Cruz, a plant ecophysiologist at Western Sydney University, has made similar measurements with leaf heaters in tropical forests in Australia, and she reports that photosynthesis decreased by as much as 35%. Unfortunately, the tree species that are longest lived in old growth rainforests, they are the sensitive ones, she says. So they may be sedentary specialists which do not respond rapidly to changes or respond to rapid changes. More encouraging findings come from Biosphere 2, though. A massive set of greenhouses completed in 1991 outside Tucson, Arizona. Inside the largest space, tropical trees grow up to 27 meters high. Biosphere 2 became famous at one point. People were living in it, and then there were many interesting results that came out, but it's still functional. In a 2020 paper in Nature Plants, a team led by Marielle Smith, an ecosystem ecologist now at Bangor University, examined changing CO2 levels inside the greenhouse under a range of temperatures. The researchers found that even when temperatures reached 43 degrees C, photosynthesis was not impaired. They concluded that the biosphere's plants could withstand the heat because they had plenty of water, allowing them to cool their leaves by opening their stomata. So the stomatal response may work if the water stress is never reached. In a warming climate, it's possible that humidity will increase, vapor pressure deficit will not increase, so stomatal opening can continue to work as evaporative cooling mechanism. Okay, so biosphere 2 then is basically a positive story so far, and I won't read all the details, but there are other experiments done with fluorometers also to find that species appear to be adjusting their photosynthetic capacity to withstand higher temperatures in Biosphere 2. As researchers sift through evidence from various studies that have challenged the heat tolerance of tropical trees, a key question looms large. How much is too much, and when does the tree die? So we don't know how much warming we will hit soon, in a couple of few decades, and you want to know just how vulnerable vegetation are at what latitudes, not only in the tropics, and what altitudes, not only at sea level. So several species appear to have the ability to bounce back even after a severe heat wave, but chronic changes with increasing temperatures are very different than a heat wave that comes and goes. During Van Helm's experiment in Biosphere 2, one part of the canopy reached 55 degrees C, much hotter than during conditions examined by Smith and colleagues. That was more than the leaves could handle, so they died. So you have to always see heat waves. It's possible some plants are sensitive even to just a heat wave, which is of different duration. Duration is probably an important factor. Wood suspects tropical species can cope with heat in the short term. The plants under the heating panels in Puerto Rico, she notes, don't die more often. But problems could mount over time if photosynthesis remains depressed. So the plant may not grow, stunted growth, and other things can happen. So it's like you run out of fuel to keep managing. They have energy needed for maintaining themselves, for producing seeds and procreating and so on. Researchers also point out that heat doesn't strike in isolation. More intense storms and droughts are also stressing the forests. A light bulb moment happened where plant roots in hotter plots recovered more slowly after hurricane ravaged. So these are often called compound events, where you get a heat wave and a drought together, or a drought and a hurricane, or heavy rain and hurricane. All kinds of combinations are possible that trees may not have seen during their evolutionary periods. The fate of tropical forests in a warmer future remains uncertain overall. One thing is not in doubt: the planet's lushest ecosystems are all now in Sachs' bell jar experiment that we talked about before, with humanity and unwitting experimenters pumping in the heat. So let's look at this before we close. How plants stay cool. Changes in leaf structure can help plants cope with heat, but they require new growth. Cells have other mechanisms to help them react more quickly. So the time scale of response and the time scale of change obviously matter a lot. One, shrink to survive. As we said, smaller leaves are more effective at dissipating heat. It's a surface to volume ratio that matters. Two, fight the light. Shiny or pale leaves reflect more solar radiation, helping prevent overheating, but that has to be looked at in terms of changes in chlorophyll or chloroplasts and how that affects photosynthetic efficiency as well. So that's number 2 here. You can see darker leaf versus lighter leaf. Thin is in. So leaves with thinner tissue are better at transpiring water, which can keep them cool as well. Okay, losing heat and cooling by evaporation. So you can see there are also other water cooling. By opening tiny pores called stomata, a leaf sacrifices water for greater evaporative cooling. Plants can also grow new leaves with more stomata, so they can just evolve to have more stomata than normal. So here is a stomata, the guard cell, and there is a epidermal cell. Epiderma is the outside. Okay, so cellular level responses also occur. So chlorophyll producing cell. Plant cells can activate molecular mechanisms to prevent and repair damage from heat stress, so self-healing mechanism. Shore up membranes, increase saturated fatty acids to reduce fluidity and prevent electrolyte leakage. Just like us, when we sweat too much, we may dehydrate and lose minerals. That's the same thing there. Vacuole here, nucleus there, so preventing oxidation, boosting molecules to scavenge oxygen radicals in the mitochondria and elsewhere. And the forestall damage, what happened to me? Forestall, prevent it before happening damage, produce heat shock proteins to support the cell's many proteins which are necessary for synthesizing sugar. Modify chloroplasts, so increase saturated fatty acids to support proper functioning of the thylakoid membrane, which contains the delicate photosynthetic machinery. Obviously, I'm not a biologist or ecologist, let alone ecophysiologist, but there is enough good material that I need to read, educate myself, and then translate it to you so that it will help you. If you're an expert, you will read the paper and do better than me. If you are not, this is just an introduction that should help you know that plants are responding in many ways and some are failing to respond, but we need to map all the risks for global vegetation. Okay, see you in the next topic.